Welcome to the Bookish Hour with your hosts, Sarah E. Burr and J.C. Kenney. And we are live. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Bookish Hour. I'm Sarah Burr.
And I am J.C. Kenney, and we have something special tonight because for the first time in our history, this show is sponsored. So, with that having said, tonight's episode of the Bookish Hour is brought to you by J.C. Kenney. I've heard of that dude. Cozy mystery author. Panic in the Panhandle, Kenney's latest offering, came out today, as a matter of fact. You can find Panic in Panhandle in ebook and paperback formats wherever books are sold. And with that, Sarah, I think it's time to get bookish.
Yes. Well, again, JC, congratulations on another book out in the world. Super excited for you. And we can't wait to talk about it next week on A Bookish Moment on October 1st at 4:30. It's going to be a fun time. But speaking of fun times, we are going to have a fabulous conversation this evening, you guys. We have a bookish first for you here at the Bookish Hour. Tonight, we are joined by a writing duo, and I cannot wait to pick their brains about the process that it takes to collaborate to write an amazing suspense thriller that they have written. We're so thrilled to welcome Midge Raymond and John Yunker to the Bookish Hour. Welcome, you guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
We're so thrilled to have you here. We can't wait to talk more about Devil's Island, which is your first collaborative effort together, but you guys have actually written your own works prior. So it's going to be fascinating to just hear about your process and your journey. But I'm wondering, for our viewers who may not be familiar with you and your work, do you mind just taking a few minutes to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your writing journey?
Sure. Well, I'm Midge Raymond. I have written a novel previously called My Last Continent, which was a solo novel. And as we'll talk about a little later, John helps me so much with my work. So it wasn't a huge step to write together. But yeah, I'm the author of My Last Continent, a short story collection called Forgetting English. That was my first book, and back in 2009. And I'm also the author of FLOREANA, which is coming out in December, and it's another novel.
Nice.
And yeah.
Yes, and I'm John Yunker, and I've written two novels, also with Midge's amazing assistance. I actually self-published the first novel, which led to us starting a small press together. So that process of learning what it was like to go it on your own and navigate the editing, the cover, all that fun stuff, and of course promotion. It's been instrumental, and of course that's why we started a small press. So we've been collaborating, you could say, for over 10 years with the press, and then 20 years as writers.
Oh wow, that's so amazing. Cool. When did you? So you guys have been collaborating together for a while. How did you decide to just sit down and be like, we're going to pen a novel together that is going to have both our names on it?
I'm actually not sure we started that way. So Devil's Island was inspired by a trip that we took to Tasmania. Mm-hmm. And when we were there, what we did was Tasmania is a small island state off the coast of Australia. And we took a sort of hiking, camping trip off the tiny island of Tasmania to a smaller island called Maria Island. And once we were there, I think John was the first one that started talking about the novel, about the possibilities of this becoming a novel. For one, we fell in love with Tasmanian devils, which we learned that Maria Island is a place where they are being reintroduced to get their numbers up, because on mainland Tasmania, they're all suffering from a facial tumor disease. It's a contagious cancer that's really decimating their populations on mainland Tasmania. So on Maria Island, they're releasing healthy devils, letting them live their lives and breed and do their thing, and then taking them back to the mainland and hoping they can get in stronger numbers there. But the fun part about it, and as mystery writers, you know, when you're on a small, desolated, isolated island with no humans, no cell phone coverage, we had good weather, but you could imagine what if it got bad. And also we had wonderful travel companions and brilliant guide, so that was all good. But you know, as writers, your imagination gets going. And then I think because we were there together, we just decided we have to write this together. We both had this almost exact same experience. And as Joan was saying, we do collaborate on our own individual projects as well. So it wasn't too big of a leap, actually.
So I just would like one point of clarification here real quick. Could you please prove once and for all, or disprove, that real Tasmanian devils are nothing like the Tasmanian devil from Looney Tunes?
I was just, having been raised on Bugs Bunny, I was a little disappointed. They weren't quite as dervish, but they are, we didn't see them. We heard them on the island, Mariah Island, but we went to a sanctuary after on Tasmania, and they're cute little lap dogs. They're the cutest little things, but they are pretty manic. So I can kind of see where the illustrators were inspired to create this very manic creature. But yeah, no, they're amazing little animals. So it was fun to meet them.
Well, the book itself is, from at least it's told in two different perspectives. You have Brooke, who is she's an American tourist that is a part of this group. And you have Carrie, who is the tour guide that is leading this group through, in the book, Marbury Island. If hopefully I'm pronouncing that one correctly. Because I was like, because I read in the beginning that, that you guys had gone on a trip, and I called it Maria Island. So I'm like, oh man, like I'm already learning things. And I was like, okay, so this is sort of based off of something real. And then as I'm reading this story, I'm like, okay, guys, like what happened during this trip that you went on, that this story like came out of it. But hearing you talk about the Tasmanian devils, the love and respect with which Carrie presents the reader about these creatures, and she's kind of educating us as we're going on this journey. I was like, oh, this is it. Like I love animals, and I was just like tearing up hearing about their journey. And so I'm very curious, how did you? I guess what was the thought process or the inspiration behind really this being a almost like a natural awareness novel, along with this mystery that you've created?
Well, it's kind of in effect we were recreating the experience we had as outsiders, as Americans, visiting this very exotic little island. And so we obviously have American characters, but then I wanted a naturalist to really bring the reader into the world of this animal, and also to provide this point of view of someone who's been, desperately trying to save the population, and really drive home just what heroic measures they've been taking as naturalists to try to rescue these animals. So yeah, wanted to get both sides, wanted to take the reader on the journey that we took many years ago.
So speaking of the journey, tell us a little bit more about the book. Kind of give us the setup. Don't give us any spoilers or anything, but kind of maybe tell us a little bit about it.
Well, we open with a sort of fake excerpt from a travel guide, and that's the prologue. It's sort of meant to get readers introduced to the Tasmanian devil. So that's a very short little intro. And then we begin with Brooke's point of view. She's arriving, they are heading toward Marbury Island, the fictional island, from Tribuna on the mainland. And she is just been reunited with her former college friend, Jane, whom she hasn't seen in 5 years when Jane ruined her wedding. And they've been estranged ever since.
Oh my.
So she hasn't seen Jane in all this time. Jane invited her on this trip to Tasmania in the middle of nowhere. She's not sure why. But she thought, well, maybe Jane wants to make up, so why not? And her life's kind of falling apart back home anyway, so she was up for it. And then they alternate, as Sarah was saying, we alternate with Carrie's point of view. Carrie is, as John was saying, is a naturalist who rescues Tasmanian devils on the mainland, but she's burnt out. She's ready for something different, for something that feels more hopeful, and she needs a break from the rescue work. So she decided that she's going to be a guide for travelers on the island. How could that possibly go wrong? Well, she's found herself right in the position of lead guide after being a junior guide, getting everybody lost, and then the lead guide on that trip got bitten by a venomous snake, had to be rushed off the island, and so now she's the lead guide all of a sudden with no experience. So that's how it starts.
Oh my gosh. The characters, you have this really vivid cast of characters. And because it's written in the present tense, you're just like right there with everybody. Jane in particular, I felt like Brooke so many times in my life after, reconnecting with maybe that chaotic friend that you have and being like, whoa, like what adventure are we going to go on? And Jane is just such a fascinating character. And I'm curious how we've talked a little bit about how Carrie, like her purpose and the role that she plays. But maybe tell us a little bit about how the characters of Brooke and Jane as your American tourists kind of took shape and how they introduced themselves to you.
Do you want to go?
You go.
Okay. Well, I'm so happy you found that relatable. Having that one kind of wild and crazy friend, So, and I love that dynamic with Brooke and Jane. They, again, as John was saying, they came about because we wanted to introduce, Tasmania and Marbury Island the way we were introduced to it, and that to capture some of that awe. But of course, Jane has another purpose at work, which I won't go into because that would be a bit of a spoiler, but she didn't do this just for fun. So the thing we had fun with these two characters, they're both actors. That's what they majored in college, and they bonded over that, and they moved to New York together to make it in the acting world. Brooke didn't. She got married and moved to the West Coast. Jane, did have some success in acting. At least that's what Brooke believes. They stayed in touch on Facebook. And as we all know, Facebook is sort of that place where you put what your life should be like, or what you want it to look like, not what it really is like. So we played around with that too. But the fact that they're both actors, and we live in a town that has 3 theaters. It's Ashland, Oregon, where the Oregon Shakespeare Festival lives. And so we're surrounded by theater all the time. So we wrote the book in 5 acts with a play within a play and a little nod to Hamlet. So we just had a lot of fun with those two characters.
I definitely want to ask more about your decision with Hamlet. But first, I do want to say hello to our folks who are chiming into the chat, wishing folks good evening. We've got Farmhouse Reader saying happy Thursday. DHB saying good evening. Sir Reads a Lot. Hello, guys. Thank you so much for being here. We're happy that you're spending your Thursday evening with us. That's actually the perfect segue, because I was very curious about the choice, because you do have a nice little snippet from Hamlet right at the beginning. And how did that come about? How did you decide to weave that in?
Well, there's a fair amount of I guess deception in Hamlet, or attempted deception in Hamlet, and there's deception in this novel. And as Midge mentioned, there's a lot of acting. And so it just kind of came together. I don't know what point in the writing process that it came together for us, but
yeah, that is a tough one.
It didn't start off quite that crisp, but it ended that way.
Yeah, the process of writing was, we didn't know where it was going to end up. So we knew how we were going to begin and worked on the characters. And the nice thing about a journey novel is where it begins physically, where that ends physically. You go from point A to point B, but what happens in the middle, emotionally and psychologically, and, in terms of how many people are going to make it to the end, we weren't sure. So we had to play with that. And I think Hamlet emerged from that, because we thought about a lot of Shakespeare. We had a lot of references to Shakespeare in the book. It wasn't all from Hamlet, because that was something Jane and Brooke did together. So being back together again, they both kind of, it evoked Shakespeare for Brooke especially.
Because they're definitely, there's the, her auditioning process where, she thinks she may get the role of Juliet, only to hear like, she's never going to be Juliet. It's like, oh gosh, I just felt so much for Brooke, because her personal life is, you mentioned that it's kind of falling apart around her. So this like, oh, this beautiful, island sanctuary is going to be what I need to like get my life back on track. But best laid plans, as they say. I would love to kind of turn to the actual process of writing, because I struggle enough writing with trying to war through my own ideas. I'm so curious, like, did one of you write as Brooke? Did one of you write as Carrie? Were you like working together on all of the scenes? What's the process like to write the book with somebody?
Oh boy. Well, we know
In an hour.
we know of writing teams who have taken different characters and written, explicitly from one or the other character. We both wrote the book from one end to the other by ourselves, but we worked chapter by chapter, and I'd say it was like a tennis match in a sense that I would take the first stab at it, and then it would go to Midge, and she would do her magic, which is the most miraculous form of magic, and then it would come back to me, and then I would do the next chapter, and we had a loose outline. We didn't really have an ending until about maybe 2/3 of the way through, so we were winging it a bit. But I think one reason we work well together, and we've learned this over the years. Certainly, I've learned this over the years. Is I hate revision with a passion. I'm not good at with details, as Midge will tell you. She's got many examples of that, but I love blank pages, and I like ideas, and I like plot twists, and I like thinking about all of the things that can go wrong or right, and so I think that cadence of I just do this, crappy first draft, and then Midge takes it and then does her magic, and then I get it back to see, are we on the right path? Because sometimes I send it to her and she'd say, what are you doing? And it wouldn't work, and then I have to go, we had some lively discussions, definitely, but it worked really well, I'd say.
I would too. And I want to go back and just say that what John does is magic to me, because he can really put in twists that I never would have thought of. And he can make everything way more complicated and really throw in some crazy stuff. And that's what makes a suspense novel so good and so fun is all that stuff that he makes possible. I feel like I'm just sort of fleshing it out a little bit and definitely adding a bit of detail. It's kind of skeletal, the chapters that I would get from John. Some of them were pretty skeletal, but that's fine by me. I love that.
That's amazing.
Well, it sounds to me like really you're taking, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts, really, that, you've got, each what you're good at, what you like, and the other is kind of the opposite, and you put it together and you've got this amazing magic. So that's really, really cool.
And we're twice as fast, because when I write alone, it's you measure that on a 7 years plus for a book, whereas together it took 2 years, a year and a half?
Probably, yeah, less than 2 years to write it. And my first novel came out in 2016, and now it's 2024. My second novel's coming out. And meanwhile, John and I have already finished his second suspense novel.
Oh, wow.
So it's very efficient. It's very efficient. I think it helps having someone like, if John gives me pages, I feel as though I have to get them back, and then when he gets them back for me, he feels as if he has to write the next chapter, right? So you just push each other along, and then you have a novel all of a sudden.
Well, the way that you've described your process, I think, in the books that I have read previously that were co-authored by different people, you can sometimes say, like, I bet this person wrote this section or this chapter or what have you. But the seamlessness which this book was woven together. I mean, when I sat down to read it, it was like I opened up page 1 and then all of a sudden I was like on page 100. Like it just like flies by. It flows so succinctly, and we've got this beautiful, beautiful landscape that all of this drama is being set against. But we're also learning a lot too. And, we're learning about the wildlife on the island. We're learning from Carrie about just like the rehabilitation of the Tasmanian devil population. But it was just done in a way where it was just a seamless experience. And I just like cannot commend you enough for like how awesome it is, because it felt effortless while I was reading. And I sometimes you can read a book and it's like, oh man, like this feels like you're doing a little bit of work, but you guys presented it in such just like a nice wrapping that it was incredible to know that like you worked together and this is what you were able to do.
Well,
Thank you. That is the highest praise. I appreciate that so much.
Oh,
It reminds me of a quote from Ernest Hemingway that said, "Easy writing makes hard reading." You know, so we did work hard at it, and I think too, as co-authors, yeah, when you write something together, you do want it to feel seamless. So I'm really thrilled that you felt that. Thank you.
Yeah, it was loved it.
That's just to kind of dovetail on Sarah's point. That makes me think of when I was younger. I read gobs and gobs and gobs of horror. Stephen King was my favorite author, and I remember reading The Talisman that he wrote with Peter Straub. And I remember, Sarah, I found myself, back 40 years ago, reading that, and it's like, yeah, I could kind of almost sense, yeah, I think Peter took this, and maybe Stephen took that. And as a reader, you that takes you out of the story. Because you find yourself, it's like, okay, well, who wrote this one? And so for the two of you, John and Midge, to, tell a story where your readers aren't thinking that at all. They're too absorbed in the story to be caught up on who wrote what. That is quite the accomplishment.
And I'm so glad to hear that you guys are that you've already done this again, because that it works. There, especially I think when you approach a book as a writer and as a reader, it can sometimes be hard to separate yourself from the craft. I don't know, maybe I'm the only person that thinks this, but sometimes I will sit down and I'll be too technical about how I'm approaching the reading of a book. And sometimes I think that that's due to just either the genre that I'm in or whatnot. But boy, when I can sit down and just get lost in a book, that is it's a joy. And we actually have a question from one of our audience members. DHB is asking, editing on the fly with self-imposed deadlines, how do you define the direction of the story? Do you just outline or wing it? Because you'd mentioned that you lightly outline, but I guess what happens when the outline isn't giving you what you need?
We go out and drink. Seriously, we did. We would say, okay, we got to get out of the house. Let's go and hash out. Let's get to that next. It's kind of like scaling Everest. We got to base camp. Hey, we got to base camp. We're at a third of the way through the novel. But now what? We can't see. It's getting, the snow is picking up. So then we reconvene and we hash it out and try to keep the outline moving ahead. There was a point around 2/3 the way through that we really had to, come together and really know how it was going to end. But it did help to have an outline. I don't think I ever started a chapter not without some scaffolding in my mind and play. I'm not that good of a writer that I can just completely go off and free write in that respect.
I have to laugh at your use of Mount Everest, because you do have a supporting character who makes it very known that she has gone up Mount Everest. And, there were, so many like good, like snarky, barbed moments in the book where, yes, it's suspenseful and you're like, okay, like what's going to happen? But there are just these really nice moments of levity, especially, between Brooke and Jane when they are kind of having their silent communication with each other, or when Brooke is figuring out why she's actually been brought to the island. So I'm curious, which of your supporting characters did you find, maybe did you have the most fun with, and who was the most challenging to incorporate into the story?
That's a good question.
That's a great question.
Charlotte, maybe?
Yeah, no, stop.
We're thinking.
Yeah, Charlotte was definitely, she was very interesting. Yeah, she was complex in ways that took us a while to figure out. Margaret was easy. She was just a certain type of person that we all know.
We all know.
There she was.
We met a Margaret once on a trip.
Yeah, not this trip,
Not
but
this
another
trip,
one.
no.
So that was kind of fun. And yeah, having spent so much time together and, traveled together, sometimes when we're working on the characters, one of us will say, oh, remember that person? And then we'll be like, oh yeah. And then immediately we know who that character is. And because it's someone we had met along the way or, crossed paths with or whatever. So yeah, they were all fun. Some of them were not very likable. And I kind of liked Margaret. She, if for whoever, she was who she was, but I got a kick out of her. And maybe just as a writer, they're so fun to write. Maybe that's why I like her.
She was unapologetic.
Exactly. And Ian was fun too.
Yeah, Ian was fun.
He's a birder, and that's, so John got to use a lot of his bird knowledge of Australia and photography details.
Yeah. I just remember too, you had asked when the book came to be. When we actually did the real trip, we were the only Americans, and we've kept in touch with the other travelers. But I do remember at one point they knew we were writers, and they joked, "Oh, you're going to write about us and make a book about us." And I think that's when it implanted it.
That might have been, yeah, because we said, "Oh yeah, of course we will." And actually, I was in touch with them to say this. No, it has nothing to do with you. None of these people are based on you. They were really the finest people. It was really, we felt so lucky to have such a good trip because as the novel shows, it can also go the other way.
Yes. And especially with that, the fact that there's like a culture clash a little bit where, we have the Australians versus the Americans, and you have the Carrie who is kind of, I really like Carrie. So her opinion of everybody was, she was open to see let's see what this group turns out to be. Like, let's hope the Americans aren't as loud as the last ones that are here. Right. And so I'm curious about the, and it sounds like from your traveling experience, rooting us so well in Australia and how maybe an Australian perspective. I would have thought, honestly, that this book was written by somebody from Australia. So how did you get into that mindset?
That's a good question. Well, we know some Australians, which helps. And we've been there a few times,
and we spent about 4 weeks there during this trip. And so we felt, quite immersed. We even here at home, we watch a lot of Australian television because it's fun.
Offspring,
right? And if anyone hasn't seen Offspring yet, watch it. The whole thing. Don't run, don't walk.
Okay.
Offspring is amazing.
Australian writers. We read a lot of Australian.
And we read Australian writers.
Nice.
So it's sort of not that we could ever be Australian, but I think Carrie. I thank you for saying that because that means a lot, knowing that we kind of got some of those details right. It's hard to do if you're not part of the culture, but having spent a lot of time there and reading and watching, absorbing their media helps a bit, I think.
Nice.
Well, and I also.
Oh no, go ahead.
I was going to say I also literally sat down with someone one day. I think everyone else had gone out to do some crazy hike that involved scrambling over rocks. And we had just gotten to, the fictional town is Saltwick, but the real town is called Darlington. And I remember just thinking, I need to put my feet up for an afternoon. I'm just going to take it easy today. And I sat with one of our fellow guests and was asking her, tell me about Australian expressions. Tell me about some of your, the slang that I might not hear all the time. And that I still have that notebook. I mean, she gave me all kinds of great stuff, which ended up going in the book. And it's stuff you might get from watching Australian TV or reading a lot of Australian writers, but not all of it. She gave me a wealth of stuff. And we didn't know we were going to write Devil's Island then, but I just wanted all that information, and it came in really handy in the end. And I'm so sorry I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, hey, this is about you two. So, it's like you interrupt me, whenever you want. But since I do kind of have the floor again, I do unfortunately have to let everybody know that our delightful conversation is already half past gone. So, for those of you watching live, if you got any questions for John and Midge, any comments, please put them in the chat. And I do just want to let everybody know that today's episode of the Bookish Hour is brought to you by that J.C. Kenney dude. Kenny's latest offering, Panic in the Panhandle, came out today, yes, and has been called The Glades Meets Tiger King by none other than best-selling author Sarah E. Burr. Panic in the Panhandle is available in ebook and paperback formats wherever books are sold. And having paid the bills there, I want to ask, I want to talk setting for a bit. We've touched on it just a little bit, but one of the things that I'm really curious about, Midge and John, is when I think the first kind of things that come to mind to me when talking about a book set on an island, as someone who reads and writes crime fiction, is And Then There Were None, Shutter Island, stories like that where the setting, an island, really becomes a character in and of itself. Could you talk to us a little bit about what was your thought process? I mean, I realize that you went to this island, you went to visit there on vacation, but was there ever a debate, to put your story on an island? And then how did that go from there as far as the setting and helping create all those great island vibes?
Wow. I'd say never a debate. I think the moment we landed on that island and they dropped us in the water, it had an effect on us. And it really, it is a magical place. And Midge, I'll give her all the credit. She is the expert in place. Yeah, seriously. You should read her other novels and you'll get a feel for Galapagos or Antarctica. But it was great to try to capture how we felt when we were walking through the woods under the eucalyptus and just the birds, hearing all the birds, the parrots. Of course, I had no idea that parrots are just everywhere in Australia. Not everywhere, but there's a significant range of parrot species in Australia. I had no idea. And that led me down the research part of this book was a whole nother aspect of it from a birding and Tasmanian devil perspective. But yeah, the island was definitely a character. Absolutely.
Yeah, and my next novel is about an island as well. And I do agree, that islands, they have personalities, and they're moody. There's always a lot of weather on islands, right? So I think with Mariah Island, AKA Marbury Island, I think the personality it had was sort of like it was a protective place. I mean, we thought of it as a place where devils could be rehabilitated and live and prosper. There were no humans on the island, which was really sweet. There are very few places in the world where you can go and not run into people all the time. It was kind of a shock to be among, it was just the 8 of us. And then to be among, just our little group. And then all of a sudden to go to this town and there were people, and there weren't many, maybe a couple dozen people hanging around, but it was so nice. It's nice to be in isolation sometimes. And it felt really good. And it felt really peaceful. There's no human sound there if you're not talking, it's really, really special. So I remember that very well also.
I mean, the way that you describe it in the book, it feels like otherworldly almost. Mm-hmm. And the things about, just like walking through and seeing all these different types of animals and, John, you had mentioned, parrots. I didn't know anything about parrots living in Australia, nor did I know that like their eggs are sold on like the Indonesian black market or something. I was like, what is like our world is such an incredible place. And the fact that, you're bringing to life this real location for us, with a fictional twist, it's such a cool journey. But you do so much with the education of it too. And maybe let's talk a little bit about the research that went in regarding, the different animals that you're sharing with us, as well as maybe the different plants and the flora, fauna, all of that good stuff. What was the process, I guess, like after visiting the island, coming back and being like, okay, like how do we highlight the conservationism of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really got under our skin. When we went to Australia, it was to see penguins. Primarily, it was New Zealand and Australia.
Oh, wow.
We were penguin nuts, and
I love them.
yeah, and so we did see some penguins, but it was the marsupials, if you will, that they're the wombats, the kangaroos, the wallabies. It's mind blowing, and I think maybe it was some of our Australian colleagues, like, oh yeah, wombat, although a few of them don't see that many wombats, but wallabies are, they're pretty more common. Like maybe here we have a lot of deer, and that might be exotic to an Australian coming to the US. For us, it was extremely exotic to see wallabies everywhere, and kangaroos and wombats. So, but when it got back here, yes, I had to do a lot of research into marsupials and to birds. There's a great book about birds called Where Song Began. I learned that songbirds, according to the author of this book, many believe now songbirds actually originated out of Australia and kind of spread globally. I didn't realize, because you go to Sydney and there's parrots everywhere, and
They're like pigeons.
yeah,
They're
they
everywhere.
view them
Wow.
almost like we would view pigeons, because they can be kind of annoying. The sulfur-crested cockatoo, which is a gorgeous bird, absolutely spectacular. They're everywhere, and they're viewed by Australians as nuisances, the way we
So-
might view.
They're really loud.
They're very loud.
Yeah, and everyone's always like, "Oh my God," but they're so beautiful and they're huge birds, and
Yeah.
we just love them all.
I can imagine.
Yeah, so it was a lot of research, but also I just wanted to, you just wanted, take the American reader on this journey and just share how our minds and eyes were just blown by this experience.
That's awesome. I can't imagine ever comparing a parrot remotely to a pigeon. As someone who lives in New York, it's like pigeons are so boring. Parrots, oh my gosh. The animals were so, I loved the animal aspect of this, and especially Carrie's relationship that she describes with Boomer, her devil that she was nurturing, and the roller coaster that was. These poor people, poor animals. So our world is such a amazing and scary and wild place.
But it's also inspiring because I did what probably fed into the novel as well is we actually, there's a woman in Tasmania who does an Airbnb, and we spend a night with her, and she rescues wombats on her own and rehabilitates them because they get hit by cars, tragically. So you meet all these amazing people. She wasn't a quote unquote naturalist. She's just some woman who wanted to rescue wombats, and she was nursing them back to health and raising these little creatures into big creatures, and then re-releasing them in areas where they could be safe. We met a lot of people like that, and of course in the U.S. you meet them as well. So I mean, it's just that's kind of, I think we write a lot about animals and the people that devote their lives to protecting them, rescuing them, because it's a very heroic aspect of this planet, and it's actually very inspiring. It's neat to meet these people in real life.
It's good to know that they're out there. And we have Sir Reads a lot in the chat saying that penguins and wombats, very cool. So we got some animal lovers with us tonight too.
Well, and I was just going to say that confession time, I think I follow at least 3 different Instagram accounts of wombat rehabilitators. And yes, just because I've decided that, I'm a little roly-poly. I'm not very fast. I don't mind sleeping. So yeah, I wouldn't mind coming back in my next life as a wombat. So they're adorable. But a little more seriously, one of the things that you kind of touched on here a little bit, I'd like to kind of dive into, is talk about a little bit more, if you could, about you mentioned that through this story in particular in your writing, it's an opportunity to expose all of us to new cultures, new worlds, new things like that. Because someday I'd love to go to New Zealand, I'd love to go to Australia, but that's a hike, and not everybody can do that. And yet you bring that to us through your writing. So could you talk a little bit about, or a little more really, about the efforts to bring the realism of Australian and Tasmanian culture to the story?
You want to go?
Yeah, go for it.
Well, yeah, thank you for that. We feel so lucky to have been able to travel as much as we can. We're super fortunate. And again, it's mostly, as Joan was saying, it's the wildlife that draws us to various places. And that's really what we want to bring back. My first novel was set in Antarctica, and it doesn't have any human history because it's just big icy glob at the south of the planet, but it has an interesting human history in that the scientists who work there's a lot going on there. There's good research going on. There's a lot of good penguin research going on, and I got fascinated by that. But for us, it's kind of about wildlife and getting the word out about species that people may not think about, may not even really know exist in real life. Because again, the Tasmanian devil, as you said, is a cartoon character for so many people. And you don't think about the real animal, that it actually is an animal, and it's actually quite endangered, and people are working really hard to make sure they stay on the planet. So that kind of thing is really fun and meaningful, and it's nice to go to different places, but it's also, when you travel, you want to learn. And so when we write, we hope that people learn something as well. I mean, we hope most of all that it's fun and entertaining and, a good beach read, as it should be. But it's also great if people can learn to appreciate the wombat or the Tasmanian devil or anything else in the book.
I think the
writing was I'm sorry, the writing, you learn the research. We learned so much more just by researching about Tasmanian devils and so forth, and just all the data around devils in the book is true as we could determine it to be. So it was, it was a journey. We're very curious people. Writers are curious people, right? And so it was really just the act of writing forces you to do research, which by the end of the book, we just like the readers, we knew a lot more about the animals as well.
The story, there was a moment where you're sharing about the extinction of I believe it was the Tasmanian tiger. And though it was so poetic because the story had to do with I believe one of the last tigers was just died of being cold because they couldn't get back inside. And it was just this line of majestic animals is out in a cold whimper. And I was just the poetic nature of the way that you're giving us that information there's such an emotional charge to it. And just really, it was a really beautiful reading experience. And so I'm very, very excited to hear that there is more from you as a duo as well. I know you both have solo projects that we would definitely love to hear about. Is there anything that you can share about your next project though together? Is it along the same line, or what do we have to look forward to?
Well, it's not quite so far away. It's in the US. It's set in San Diego, and it's tentatively called Fire Season. But it does have an environmental angle to it as well. And it was actually inspired by some of the wildfires that we had experienced and others have experienced, and just the nature of living in areas where fire is an ever-present threat, and that feeling of just that fragility. And I think most Americans now feel that, no matter where you're. Floridians are feeling that right now. So it's no matter where you are, there's something that you can bear, that you have to deal with, an existential threat. And in San Diego, it was fire, and that kind of started it. But it's also, on a human level, it's about going home. You can't go home again because it's about a couple, and the guy in particular is going home to his hometown. And there's a lot of literal and figurative skeletons, if you will, and that come out and they have to deal with as a couple and individually.
I love it. I'm hooked already. If you had to give advice to anyone out there who may be listening about and is thinking of writing with a partner, what are some of the lessons learned that maybe you learned while writing Devil's Island that you implemented in this next project, or just words of wisdom that you have to share about people who may be curious about writing with somebody else?
Yeah, I guess my first bit of advice is leave your ego at the door, which, and honestly, 20 years ago, I couldn't have done this with Midge. I mean, we were together, but I was very sensitive about my writing. I got a little defensive. You can attest to that. I was a little too precious. I was too precious. I was not able to accept criticism. And I don't like criticism. I still don't, but I can accept it now. I can leave my ego at the door. I can look at the greater goal and work towards it. And once I got to that point, maybe it's just age, or maybe it was just realizing what an amazing partner I have. Then I was ready to do that. But I would say it's a collaboration, and it's not going to be all yours. It's going to be better than, it's going to be greater than the sum of the parts, and you have to accept that and actually be inspired by that before you go down that road together.
Yeah, I agree. You can't be precious. And that's good advice for any writers, not to be too precious. I love getting feedback. I love editing. I love revising. So I enjoy that part of the process a lot. So I have no problem with critique, but you do have to take a breath. I was talking to another writer about writing, a writer I know who writes with his wife. And so they write books together. And he said something like, often it's the person you're closest to that you're the most brutally honest with. And you have to be careful. If you were sitting across from a colleague, you're going to be nicer to that colleague than the person you see like 24/7. So it's that too. It's sort of like you have to realize, okay, we're collaborating. This is a project. Don't be snappish, and also to have fun with it. We, as Joan was saying, we go out to happy hour, we go to dinner, we go out and have book meetings so that we can have a little fun while we're doing it. So it's play as well as work. Those are all really, really good pieces of advice. I love that.
And speaking of work, could you tell us a little bit, easy for me to say, let's try that again. Could you tell us a little bit about your publishing house? You said you also, you have a small press. So tell us about that a little bit.
It's called Ashland Creek Press, and we founded it over 10 years ago, and it's very small. It is not, we do not take salaries. We do other things to keep the doors open, but it was born out of a desire. As I mentioned, I was self-published. I had an agent, she couldn't sell it. And I was stubborn, and I said, well, because with an agent, they kind of get to an end of the road, and then they say, well, did my best, And I wasn't going to just let it lay there. And so I self-published. And Midge and I, by the way, we worked in publishing a bit in our prior lives. Midge at a big publisher, me at a smaller publisher. So I have more tech skills like book design, layout, and website skills. And she, of course, has worked as a copy editor, proofreader, developmental editor, everything. So we realized we could do this, and do it on the side. And so we've kind of sought out writers who are focused on animal themed issues or environmental issues. And it's been a little slow over the past year because of our own writing, but next year we want to kick it back into gear again.
I love that you guys are focusing on the environment and the promoting awareness. I think having that mission, not only does it just it's doing good out in the world, but it's also, the passion that is instilled within it, it really comes through in the work that you're doing. Midge, correct me if I'm wrong, but is it true that you have you're a private investigation license or something? Did I misread that?
Thank you for asking. During the pandemic, I read about a certificate program at the University of Washington in private investigation. And so I thought, and I don't remember what stage with Devil's Island we were at. I think it was with an agent at the time. And, she was sending it out, and I thought, well, this is something I need. Obviously, I need to get a certificate in private investigation. So it was it was 10-month long course, all online. It was too much fun. I would highly recommend it. I learned from a retired PI about the business of investigation, and then we had sessions with a civil rights, a civil, what is it?
Civil procedure.
Yes, thank you. Civil procedure, civil versus criminal. So we had criminal lawyer and then a civil lawyer. So we got to learn about those types of cases and what PIs do in some of them. So if there's like a civil case, like someone tripped and fell on my walkway and I'm injured, you basically go and surveil the person who claims to be injured to make sure they're really injured, that kind of thing. And then the criminal one was really, really interesting too, because it was with a defense attorney who worked for the criminals, the alleged criminals, and trying to find out, what they really did. And a lot of times they made sure that innocent people walked free because they get it wrong. It was very, very interesting. It was like getting a bit of law school, and I learned a lot. I passed my licensing exam, but I didn't get a license because that was the Washington State licensing exam, and I live in Oregon. But I really had a lot of fun with it. And I don't know if it'll come to play in our books, but I'm sure it'll come in handy. Just the stuff I learned was very, very interesting.
That is so cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
I'm like making a note because if that's an online course, that sounds like that would be so fascinating.
Oh, I highly recommend it. It was so much fun. And then what they do, so one of the assignments is you interview people as if you were interviewing a witness. And so the TA for the class, she reached out to all of us and said, do any of you want to play the witness? So I got to sort of keep on with it by being like a pretend witness for the next round of students. It was awesome. It was really great.
Oh, that is too cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
This has been, I'm looking at the time and oh my gosh, it flew by. This was so wonderful to dive into your process, to dive into the incredible work that is Devil's Island. Available now, folks. I highly, highly recommend it. It is you will sit down and be done with it before you know it, because it's so engaging, and you're going to learn so much about Australia, and it's absolutely wonderful, especially for our animal lovers out there. So fabulous. We're so thrilled that you guys could stop by and share this with us. And thank you for being here. For our last parting words for our audience members, do you guys have any recommendations for podcasts, books, TV, anything that you're consuming that you would recommend us checking out? And it doesn't even have to be mystery theme or whatnot. We just love hearing what folks are reading and watching.
Well, I have one. I'm in the middle of a book, and I've got an advanced copy, which is so fortunate. It's coming out October 8th. It's called The Murderess by Lori Natero. And this is based on a true crime. Ooh. And it opens at Union Station in Los Angeles, where two trunks come off the train, and they're oozing something that is suspicious. And the porters think it might be, this is during the Depression, it's 1931, the porters think it might be that someone has stuffed a deer in there hunting and, for food. But they try to get it opened. A woman comes to claim them. They say, ma'am, open the trunks. And she says, oh, I don't have the keys, and disappears. It turns out the bodies of her two best friends are in those trunks.
Oh my goodness.
And the story goes from there. It is really wonderful. Lori Natero is a journalist. She's written a lot of books, but she was a journalist as well. And so she brings the level of research and detail that she brings to the story is so amazing. So that's what I'm reading. So that's fun. And it's a novel, but it's based on a true crime, and it's just riveting.
Nice.
October 8th, yeah.
And I'm just thinking TV. So I mentioned Offspring, which we watched. It's Australia. I'm trying to think of other Australian.
Deadlock. Sorry to interrupt.
This is New Zealand. Or no, it's New Zealand.
No, it's Tasmania.
Is it Tasmania? Oh, it's Tasmania. Oh, Deadlock. Yes, Deadlock.
Got to make it
up.
That's
Deadloch. Yeah, that is Tasmania, and it's brilliant.
It's set in a small fictional town, rural town in Tasmania, and it's dark comedy. But it captured the mood. It's very moody, but the place is beautiful, and I think they do capture a lot of the dynamics that we heard about when we visited, because it's a fast-changing state. Tasmania, there's a lot of mainlanders moving to Tasmania, which is creating interesting tensions, which is captured in the series. But it's well worth watching.
Ooh, fabulous. JC, do you have any recommendations for us this week?
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and jump in on and offer some more Australian love. Just finished watching season 2 of Troppo, Troppo. It's a police procedural of sorts starring Thomas Jane, who folks may remember him as the detective in season 1 and season 2 of The Expanse. And so Troppo, it's set in actually northern Australia, but it's fantastic. There are 2 seasons on Acorn. Check it out. And then another one from down under, One Lane Bridge, which is I think that may actually, it's been a little while, so I'm not certain, but I'm pretty sure that may be New Zealand. Another kind of police procedural with a little bit of a supernatural element in it. So check out those 2 if you want some more. I mean, I love Acorn, and yeah, I can't get enough of Australian and New Zealand television. I can't wait for the next season of Brokenwood Mysteries. That's my favorite. So that's what I've been watching. As far as what I've been reading, I got nothing for there, But
you've been busy.
Yes. I also am going to closer to home shout out Elspeth on CBS and Paramount. Elspeth is, if you take Columbo, combine some Angela Lansbury's Murder, She Wrote. It's a delightful kind of not amateur sleuth, but it's funny, and it is for all you crime fans. It's lighthearted crime fiction that you will absolutely love. So, Sarah, how about you?
Well, my recommendation is not lighthearted in the least. It's actually a true crime documentary that I watched over the weekend called Missing, Dead or Alive. I do not know how this production company got the rights to do what they did, but they basically follow this missing persons unit in South Carolina and go on their cases with them. And you're interviewing people who are potential suspects in these disappearances of people. As the title suggests, is the person going to be found alive, or are they going to be found dead? And sometimes it was hard for me to believe that I was watching something real, just because I was like, I can't believe I'm getting to see like the inner workings of this missing persons unit. And it was very emotional, very gripping. And it reaffirmed for me, as somebody who listens to a ton of true crime, that not all missing people are dead. I always thought like, oh, if somebody's missing, like they're probably dead. But a lot of people just go missing of their own accord. And I guess that's why police officers are always like, oh, like, they'll come back. Don't worry. All of that good stuff. So it was really fascinating to see. It's a four episode documentary. Definitely worth it, but also very dark. On a lighter note, a book that I cannot recommend enough is X's Don't, which is also coming out on October 8th. It is a romance novel written by Leah Dobrinska. Leah is a good friend of us here at the Bookish Hour. This it's part of her Fall in Love series. Absolutely love it. I love these books so much. And so it was a delight to sit down and be able to forget about all my worries and just enjoy a nice romance novel, or a rom-com, because it does have a lot of comedy in it. So those are my opposite ends of the spectrum recommendations.
That is fabulous. There you go, folks. You've all got your watching and your reading recommendations. John and Midge, this has been an absolute blast. For folks who want to connect with you or follow you online, can you give us like maybe your website, where they can find you, all that good kind of stuff?
Yes, midgeandjohn.com for our joint website, and then midgeraymond.com for Midge, and John Yunker for me.com.
Fabulous. And I believe we have that in our show notes too. So folks, you can go in and click away so you can stay connected with these guys, because you're going to want to follow this, because it's, again, like what a just fascinating book, Devil's Island. So good.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for your support and for having us on. This has been awesome.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
Oh, we're thrilled to be able to chat with you guys again. This was there's no better way to spend a Thursday night than being bookish with people. So thank you for reaching out to us. We're delighted that we got to be a part of your journey. So thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. And JC, do you want to take us out with our sponsor for our episode?
Yes, today's episode of the Bookish Hour was brought to you by J.C. Kenney. You can find his new release, Panic in the Panhandle, in ebook and paperback formats wherever books are sold. For the latest about J.C., check out his website at www.jckenney.com. And for more information about sponsoring a future episode of the Bookish Hour, please go to our website at itsbookishtime.com, and you can find more information there. John and Midge, thank you both so much. It's been great.
Thank you.
Happy Thursday night.
You too, and congratulations on your book.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to our folks that were here with us live this evening. We appreciate you being here with us. For the folks who are catching us afterwards, feel free to leave your comments on the video and let us know how much you love Devil's Island when you get the chance to read it.
Yes.
We will be back next week with an episode of A Bookish Moment, where JC will be regaling his adventures in the Florida Panhandle for us. So we will see you at that point. But until then, everyone, stay bookish. Have a great rest of your evening. Bye-bye.
Bye.